Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. Soldiers in the West African nation of Niger have declared the leader of their coup, General Abdourahmane Chiani, to be the new head of state, having profound implications for the region and as well as the rest of the world. To discuss this, I'm joined by Dr. Ebenezer Obadare, the Douglas Dillon Senior Fellow for Africa Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Nice to see you, Dr. Obadare. Can you tell us a bit more about why does this matter for the rest of the world? Let's start with the importance of Niger on every level.
Okay, thank you for having me. It matters for maybe a couple of reasons. I'm sure many Americans may not have heard of Niger before. It's a Sahelian West African country, shares borders with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Nigeria. And the coup d'etat that has just taken place in Niger matters, at least from an American standpoint, for at least two reasons. One is that Niger is one of at least 6 countries into which the United States government has poured billions of dollars over the last 2 decades. Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, with 2 distinct aims in mind. One is to help them stabilize as democratic, plural countries. That's number one. But the other reason that America has been so involved in these countries is to make sure that they help us serve as a bridgehead in the battle against ISIS and its affiliates in that region of Africa. But I don't know if your members of the audience will recall that back in March, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, as part of his visit to Africa, actually visited Niamey, the capital of Niger. It was the first ever such visit by an American Secretary of State. And during that visit, he promised the people of Niger and the now ousted President Bazoum American commitment to 4 cornerstone principles: defense, diplomacy, democracy, and development. One of that quartet, arguably the most important one, democracy, is now under threat, is in jeopardy, and the ball is now back in America's court. So for these and other reasons, it's important that Americans pay attention to what has just happened in Niger.
Let's talk about President Bazoum right now and the importance. It seemed like a very fragile democracy given the history of Niger going back to its independence from France in 1960. Were there signals that there was trouble?
Well, if you look beyond Niger, beyond the immediate horizon, you see trouble. And you can talk about trouble in at least 2 or 3 terms. One is the fact that this is a region of Africa that has come under serious pressure from Islamists. The Islamist insurgency, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the reasons why the United States has been interested in not all those countries, but specifically in Niger. As a matter of fact, there's an American base in Agadez, which is about 650 miles from Niamey, the capital of Niger. So America has been interested in Niger and these other Sahelian countries for that reason. But the other thing is, President Bazoum has been in power since 2021. He succeeded President Yusufu. America has been interested in shoring up these fragile democracies so that they can stand on their feet and withstand the onslaught of ISIS and its Islamist affiliates. So this is extremely important for the United States. The fear is that if Niger falls, and I suspect that it has, if Niger falls, it then means that not just the American footprint, but Western footprint in general. And Western footprint in general, if you consider that France has been pulling out of, of these, West African countries, it then means that
pulling out or kicked out. I thought that, look at Mali, Burkina Faso. Did France pull out of those countries, or was it kicked out by the regimes?
Well, it's a combination. It's a combination of both, right? I think France got the signal that it was no longer welcome, and then decided to pull out. But it's the aftermath that I think we should be interested in, which is that Russia, via the Wagner Group, has become more influential in these countries, and one of the things that happened, and I was tracking this, as soon as the news of this coup came out, Yevgeny Prigozhin, we all know him, the leader of the Wagner group, said, "Oh, this development is welcome. It's the right thing for the people of Niger to do," meaning that very soon, if care is not taken, Niger too might come under the spell of Moscow.
Well, it's interesting, and for those who don't recall, that the Wagner Group is in essence seen as almost the private army of Russian President Vladimir Putin. This group of mercenaries, why would they be interested in a new regime in Niger?
Well, if you look at it from the point of view of Russia, so here's a way to think about it. They are already present in key African countries. They are present in Central African Republic. They are already present in Mali. They are present in Burkina Faso. There are sources indicating that the Wagner Group is playing both sides in Sudan, in the Sudanese conflict, and that it has some presence in Libya, right? So if you look at it globally, country by country, Wagner seems to be advancing and becoming dominant in all these key countries, right? And the question is, what does Wagner stand for? What's the kind of deal that Wagner is signing with these countries? The thing that should concern an American audience is that Wagner is not interested in democratic stability. Wagner has no long-term plans for these countries. As a matter of fact, the more deregulated, disorganized, and discombobulated they are, the better for Wagner. So what that means is that what is in the interest of Wagner is not in the interest of the United States and its Western allies. The kind of deal that many of them are also signing with Wagner, brings concern to experts, which is that Wagner is not just asking to be paid. Wagner is asking to be paid either by territory or by natural resources, meaning that it is compromising the long-term stability of these countries under authoritarian leadership.
Well, and we have seen several African nations get closer to Russia. You mentioned the resources. I think Niger has certainly a substantial portion of the world's uranium. Is there anything else in that country that you think would be of interest to President Putin?
I think it's not. I mean, it's the uranium. I think is the most important thing, and why the world needs uranium.
Yeah.
But I think much more. I mean, it's not just the uranium, and it's the fact that will be another country, and a trend, a pattern is emerging where France and the United States and Britain used to be able to call the shots in West Africa. They had very close relationships with various West African leaders. And then you are in a situation where France's footprint has been reduced. The United States is scrambling, to have some influence, and Britain is no longer the force that it used to be in the region. What happens thereafter is what I worry about, which is you have a region in turmoil, and when push comes to shove, at the end of the day, it's the United States and Britain and France that are going to have to carry the slack.
Can I add a fourth element there, Dr. Obadare? Nigeria, which has got 10 times the population of Niger. Obviously, it's had its own struggles, with terrorism. What is it doing to step up or influence this situation?
So here's the situation in Nigeria, before I talk about what Nigeria is doing, because I think the context is also important. Nigeria elected a new president in February. He was sworn in May. He's currently trying to sort of settle down. Is facing a lot of pushback. The president is facing a lot of pushback due to the economic reforms that he's initiated. So in that sense, the new president, Bola Tinubu, has his hands full. Having said that, something significant happened a couple of weeks ago. He was elected chairman of the Economic Community of West African States, the sub-regional group. And speaking on that occasion, one of the main things he said that was reported in the West African media was that we're no longer going to accept military takeovers in this region, right? 2 weeks later, there is a military takeover in Niger. Niger is to the north of Nigeria.
Yeah.
Nigeria was one of the first countries to issue a condemnation of the coup. France has issued a condemnation. Britain and the United States have done the same. The question now is, how much leverage does Nigeria have? What can Nigeria do in concert with other ECOWAS members, with other members of the African Union, and with the United States and France to make sure that the status quo ante in Niger is restored?
So if this is declared to be a coup, I mean, I know it is a coup. It seems to be a factual matter, but it could have profound implications for U.S. and I guess other Western sources of funding to Niger. Is that correct?
Well, it's number one, I think the coup has succeeded. General Abdurrahman is
new head of state.
And yes, we have a new head of state. The paradigm has changed, and I think we should stop pretending that this is an attempted coup. It's already succeeded. But the other thing is, absolutely, the United States is now in a situation where, so in the first instance, is it going to be able to keep its drone base in Agadez with the new head of state allowed to do that? Two, the United States needs also now to ask itself a question. Is it going to be putting money into a country under the auspices of a military ruler? So those are two very interesting questions, and it will depend on the United States reading of this. Does it see this as a bump in the road that it will need to overcome? And I'm saying I think that's the way to see it, because you can't leave Niger and say, okay, it's under the military now. There's nothing we can do. I think calling the president, the former president, as we have to admit now, was the right thing for Secretary of State Blinken to do. But the United States has to do much more than that. The West African region cannot afford to have this, a situation where there are now an increasing number of military rulers to such an extent that it's democratic government in the region are becoming a minority. It's not in the interest of democracy in the region. It's not in the interest of the United States.
It's a real catch-22, isn't it? Because it's such a critical region. The alternative is Russia or others. I mean, give me some sense as to how popular this coup is, because the genesis was the army talking about how the former president was not handling insurgents or terrorists, and it was having an impact on the country. Was there some truth to that?
There's some truth to that, but let's dive into it just a little, because the General Abdurrahman is trying to have his cake and eat it at the same time. He's correct about the security situation having drastically worsened under the immediate President Bazoum. Mm-hmm. But here's the question I think we need to ask ourselves. Who was and is in charge of security? It's the military. So basically what we're having is this. The military is saying, we failed in our constitutional responsibility to provide defense and security. Having failed, we need to take over power in order to do our responsibility. I mean, it absolutely makes no sense. But the other part I think we should also pay attention to that, is the fact that most young people, so I've seen images of young people waving the Russian flag, storming the headquarters of President Bazoum's party, and basically appearing to support the coup. That is true, but I think it's also important for people to distinguish between objective support for the military and disenchantment with the failure of democracy and Democrats and democratic government to deliver dividends. I think it's more of the latter than the former. We saw it in Mali, we saw it in Burkina Faso, and I think the lesson for people like us who think that democratic governments are preferable in the long run is to also put pressure on Democrats everywhere to pay attention to economic reforms. That, I think, is the key issue here.
One of the interesting things about this whole Sahel region, or certainly Niger, is the impact that climate change has had on poverty levels, in terms of, just tell us a little bit about the country itself and the people and what they face.
So it's a great question, because this is not often factored into most political analysis. So Niger has a population of about 20-25 million, largely arid, On the United Nations Human Development Index, the last one I saw, I think for the last year, it was ranked 189 out of 191 countries. So this is an extremely poor country. So that for context, that's important to understand. But it's also one of 6 countries. I mentioned Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Senegal. These are Sahelian countries facing frequent, weather swings, increasing desertification, very deadly, harder agriculturalist conflict. Over the last 15 years, 2.5 million people, these 6 countries have a population of about 100 million. Over the last 10 to 15 years, 2.5 million people have been displaced due to increasing desertification and the conflicts emanating from that. So it's important to put that in context. But let me also quickly add a caveat, which is that desertification, all these other problems that can be traced to climate change do not have consequences in a vacuum. They also interact with governance. So it's important for people to understand that it's not just a matter of people reacting to climate change. Poor governance deepens the effect of climate change. So long term, in terms of policy, what you're looking at is a situation where, on the one hand, Western governments, supporters of democracy in West Africa, help those countries manage climate change. And the best way to manage climate change is to focus on questions of governance.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. Give us a sense as to what's next. We've now had the general has been declared the head of state. Obviously, there's an important role Niger has played also with human trafficking. We mentioned earlier, it's been a strong ally of the U.S. and others. What do you see happening in the next few weeks that we should keep our eyes on?
I worry that if care is not taken, one, Abdurrahman is going to consolidate himself in power. They've already shut down all borders. Then number 2, Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, has issued a congratulatory message. And I want you to pay attention to what he said in that congratulatory message. He didn't just say, "Oh, congratulations, General Abdurrahman, you've succeeded, as head of state." He said, what is happening is that ordinary people in Niger are resisting their colonizers. That is a very interesting trope because it's trying to play the people, it's trying to play on a sentiment that resonates at least with a section of the population in those countries. So it's important, at least at a discursive level, for Western government, for experts to be allowed to that and to see how to counter that narrative. But I think the role that Niger's neighbor to the south and the regional leader, the role it plays in all of this is extremely important. And part of what worries me, I'm also originally from Nigeria, by the way. Part of what worries me is that Nigeria has not been pulling its weight in the sub-region. And if the country under a new democratic leadership was looking for an opportunity to do that, it couldn't have asked for a better opportunity. I'm hoping that the United States will work in concert with Nigeria, with ECOWAS and the African Union to put pressure on General Abdurrahman to vacate power and hand over power back to President Bazoum.
Great. Well, we will continue the conversation. Dr. Obadare, thank you so much for joining us and for your insights.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.